Hello everyone, konnichiwa. Welcome to the Japan-America Society, State of Washington's virtual speaker series, Amazon's Culture of Innovation. My name is Makiko Kaufland. I'm a chair of the events committee and also a board member of the Japan-America Society. As my day job, I work as an attorney at Christensen O'Connor Johnson Kindness. Thank you for joining us. This virtual speaker series provides you educational and informational topics from the experts in the field to the members and communities. We also provide beautiful live music at the end of the presentation from local to global musicians. We really appreciate donations from a lot of attendees today to the Society's future programming and also to the musicians performing music for the event. With your help, we can make our event programs more meaningful and memorable. Thank you all so much for your support. ありがとうございます。Today, we have a presentation titled Amazon's Culture of Innovation. We are so honored to have Jeff Barr, Vice President and Chief Evangelist for Amazon Web Services, AWS, a legendary and a charismatic figure in the entire Amazon organization, to speak for us about this topic. He will share his perspective on how Amazon fosters a culture of innovation among its employees and exercises customer obsession. During this presentation, you can type your questions to Jeff in the Q&A box. We will monitor the questions throughout the presentation and ask him questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to write any question to Jeff. Now, let me introduce Jeff. Jeff Barr joined Amazon in 2002 and became the company's first web services evangelist in 2003. He founded the AWS News blog in 2004. In his role as a chief evangelist, Jeff strives to explain the benefits of cloud computing and web services to anyone who will listen. He has written over 3,000 posts for the AWS blog and another 1,100 for his personal blog, records weekly AWS update videos, and maintains an active social media presence. Jeff earned his bachelor's degree in computer science from American University and his master's degree in communication and digital media from the University of Washington. Before coming to Amazon, Jeff held the development and management positions at Microsoft, KnowNow, eBiz, and Acopia, and was a co-founder of Bizix Software. Jeff has been a technical reviewer for 4 books on web services, wrote a chapter on advanced scripting, or a book on Second Life, and is the author of Post Your Website in the Cloud, published by SitePoint in 2010. Now, please welcome Jeff.
Okay, well, thank you all for, I'm super happy to be here. Let me do the adjustment of my video, bring myself just a little bit more up there in the corner. All right, so I'm going to talk about our innovation culture. We call this Amazon Culture of Innovation, or enabling everyone to innovate. Let me check my timer here to make sure I'm going to stay good on time. Okay, so let's see where to start. First, I would like to my colleague Sarah, who set this event up for me, and Makiko, who just gave a really heartwarming introduction. Really appreciate that, and all of those that are working behind the scenes to make sure that we've got high quality audio. And then for all of you who have signed up and are watching, my hope as always is that this is a really good use of your time. Thank you so much for attending and for listening. For sure, I will be looking forward to your questions as well. Already covered most of my background, degrees in computer science and communication and digital media. Spent some time at startups at Microsoft, and joined Amazon in 2002. I've been traveling to Japan for business since 1990, and the interesting thing I think about from way back then was this was really before the internet and before high quality maps and before language translation tools. So it was much more of an adventure back then. You had to very, very carefully plan out everything ahead of time. I remember getting translated maps and directions. So if I were to get into a taxi cab, I could simply hand the driver a paper that very carefully said that please take this gentleman to this location. Things have gotten a lot easier then, but I still remember those days of business travel very fondly. I'm coming to you from Queen Anne. Earlier this morning, I happened to be walking about 6:30 this morning. We walked a little bit up from my house is the Japanese consulate, and just happened to be walking there and thought I should just take a nice fresh picture. So there I am at 6:30 this morning, out and about. Okay, so just to make sure that you all know what Amazon is all about, I suspect some or many of you are customers. I am part of Amazon.com. We are in the online retail business. We were founded in July of 1994, and then the Japanese website and all of the fulfillment infrastructure that is behind that was opened up in the year 2000. At the end of last fiscal year, we had over 840,000 employees and about $280 billion in revenue. So that's Amazon.com, the retail side. I'm actually part of the group called Amazon Web Services, or AWS. So this was officially launched in 2006. A year or two before that, we'd started launching some of our first services, storage and compute and messaging. We launched data. But in 2006, we officially launched AWS in the market category that's now known as cloud computing. Today, AWS has 175 different kinds of web services, compute to networking, to storage, to database, to machine learning, AI, robotics, security, very, very wide range of services. Our customers are software developers, entrepreneurs, enterprises, federal, state, and local government as well. AWS took off very quickly and is still a rapidly growing business. We are most recently at a 33% annual rate and a $40 billion annual run rate. I was lucky enough to be on hand when we officially opened up what is now AWS Japan. This was in 2009. I was able to find this really old picture from my colleague Hideki-san. He was the first employee we hired in Japan. He was our first marketing manager, was essential to our start of the business. This was his very humble cubicle from which we launched AWS-J, as we called it at the very, very beginning. I was able to get this picture because we said these are our very humble beginnings, but we had this great sense that we were about to embark on something really big and really important. And now AWS Japan is far, far bigger and employs a very, very large number of people. One really important factor for our growth in Japan has been our users and our customers and our fans. Back in 2010, Hideki-san invited me to the initial meeting of the JAWS UG. So that stands for Japan AWS User Group. I think we must have had I'm saying about no more than 30 or 40 people at that very first event. I was able to give the first talk. Today, JAWS has spread through all Japan and beyond. There's over 60 branches of JAWS. There are 100 leaders of the different groups and chapters within JAWS. They run about 300 different events per year, and there are well over 6,000 members. You always hear Amazon talking about customer obsession. These are our initial AWS customers and users and fans and friends in Japan. And every time that I go, they are wonderful, gracious hosts. They're always inviting me to speak at their events and make sure that I always have just a first-class time there. So JAWS UG has been a central contributor to our success in Japan, as far as I'm concerned. One of my favorite, among many different Japanese meals, unagiju, I believe is the right term for this. I'm a big fan of Japanese cuisine, by the way, you'll probably notice. Okay, so let's get deep what we actually came here to speak about. Let's talk about how we organize for innovation at Amazon. There's 4 things that we think about routinely: culture, mechanisms, architecture, and organization. We see these 4 things as what we would think of as pillars of our innovation model. However, one thing that's central to our model that's here is, regardless of how long we've been doing something or how well we might think we're doing it, we always leave ourselves room to do even better in the future. So whenever you see a list of things written down inside out, you'll always see a little note at the bottom that says, unless you know better ones. If we're putting together features or tenets, we will always say, well, this is what we know so far, but we think there might be a way to do it even better. So let's spend a few minutes talking about these as we go. Now, one thing I would like to share with you, as the content I'm sharing with you is part of a presentation that I will often give to customers and to non-customers and to user groups. I've taken the most important part and shrunk it down to 30 minutes or so. If you have a group that you think would benefit from this, and maybe you want a more detailed look at this, I'm happy to talk to you privately about doing that as well. So feel free to get in touch. Let's talk about culture. Culture starts with the customer obsession. Unlike a lot of companies where they have some kind of an R&D lab that builds things and then tries to market and sell them afterward, everything that we do starts with thinking about who are the customers and how do we meet their needs. When we're looking to hire, we hire people who have a desire and expertise in actually building things. We give them an environment where they can actually build, and we support them with a belief system. Now, this belief system, we identify as what we call the Amazon leadership principles. These are not in the least bit secret. If you can go to your favorite search engine, you can do a search and you can find these leadership principles. What's really important is that this isn't something that we simply put on the website or put on the wall of the office and pay no further attention to. This is our vocabulary for thinking and for hiring and for decision making. We use these at just every different aspect of life and culture within the company. When I'm asked to give anybody advice about how they can best be hired at Amazon, I always say you need to study the leadership principles and make sure that you can explain yourself, explain your background in these terms. When we're giving each other feedback, when we are discussing aspects of what we don't like about something, do our best to map it back to a leadership principle. We'll often abbreviate these leadership principles as LPs because we reference them quite a bit. There are 14 of these leadership principles right now. We do change them occasionally, but in the last, I'd say, at least 6 years since I've been speaking about them as part of talking about culture, we really haven't revised them. We've pretty much settled on these as working very well for our customers and for our employees around the world. So you can see them for yourself: customer obsession, ownership, invent and simplify, and so forth. I'm going to go into just a little bit of detail on a few of these on my next slides. One that is sometimes a little bit surprising is this one on the bottom right, the have backbone, disagree, and commit. This is a really interesting aspect of our culture. When we go into a meeting to make a decision, we're going to enter, we're going to spend some time reviewing the documents that outline the decision to be made. We're going to discuss very, very energetically and forcefully, if necessary, the pros and cons of the decision. We're going to challenge each other to make sure that we have all the right data to make a good decision. But we're going to ultimately make a decision. The interesting thing is, regardless of which side we might have been on, if we could decide between A, B, or C, we might be using our data and our instincts to argue for B or for C. At a certain point, the decision is made, and we're saying, let's go with A, for example. At that point in our brain, we do this operation we call disagree and commit, where we say, okay, we have done our best to advocate for the positions that were chosen. We did our best to make sure use all the right information at our disposal. However, the group made a different decision. We effectively flip a switch in our head and say, okay, we did our best, but for the purpose of group cohesion, I'm going to commit wholly to that that decision. I'm not going to hold any regrets. I'm not going to come back later and say, I told you so, you made a mistake. We wholly commit to that decision. This lets us really act as a group and avoids regrets later. Another one that's really important is we call this bias for action. Bias for action recognizes that speed really matters in business, and a lot of decisions and actions you take are actually reversible. And so we want to get to the point where we've probably figured out, let's say 70% of the data. If you can think of 100% as having every possible fact so you can make a perfect decision, the 70% says, go as far as you can, it's reasonable, but based on what you know, take a calculated risk, and we'd rather make a lot of pretty good decisions than a much smaller number of perfect decisions. Now, when we do this, we also ask ourselves a really important question, and we say, is this a one-way door or a two-way door? Let me spell both of those out for you. A one-way door is a decision that once you make it, it's very hard to walk it back. So if we decide to launch on web services in the country, if we decide to put a new service out for our customers, once we do that, we're committed to that really for the indefinite future. So it'd be very difficult. It would be for customers if we were to walk that back and say, never mind, we circumstances change. So a one-way door, we're going to be a little bit more careful about taking that calculated risk. A two-way door, on the other hand, this is something that if we try it out and it turns out that we made the wrong decision, we'd rather try it out quickly, learn that, okay, well, we didn't understand it as well as we thought. Let's step back a bit. Maybe we have to reverse it, and maybe we need to step forward again after doing a little bit more study. Informally, I think of the one-way door is you're getting a tattoo. You're kind of stuck with it once you get it. A two-way door, maybe you get a new haircut, maybe you change the color of your hair. Doesn't work, you can let it grow out, you can change it again. So, but we do, as we're making these decisions, we actually, in every decision-making document, you will see us ask this question very explicitly. Is this a one-way door or is this a two-way door? Another one that, and central to our innovation process, this model of inventing and simplifying. So as I said a bit earlier, we don't have some separate group somewhere that you would think of as the R&D team. The expectation from within the organization, we're all charged with inventing and simplifying. We're always going to be looking around ways, okay, whatever challenge, whatever problem is in front of me, what can I invent to solve this problem, to address this customer need? Can I find it within the organization? Can I see something out in the world, in industry that I can learn from? And in addition to simply inventing new things, we're going to try to simplify as we go. If you look at the picture on the screen, you'll see one of the original Kindles, and you'll see a later generation Fire tablet. That original Kindle, as you see, it was very complicated mechanically and operationally. There was a full keyboard, there were a bunch of controls and sliders and buttons on there. Way more complicated than it needed to be. We iterated on that, several generations of hardware and software and customer feedback, and you see the much sleeker, the much simpler tablet on the right-hand side. So invention is one aspect of what we need to do, but then just as important is taking that sometimes initially overly complicated thing that you built the first time around and then simplifying it and then saying, maybe we thought we need these things, but actually we don't. And what can we simplify and optimize out of what we do? Now, the last part of this, really important. As we do new things, we accept that we may be misunderstood for long periods of time. This is a recognition that sometimes when you venture off into a new business, you might have essentially a big picture vision and maybe a longer roadmap of where you'd like to get to, but you don't always think that you need to share that. Sometimes you need to simply put out a few of your initial offerings and let the world figure out over the longer term what it is that you're up to. AWS itself is a perfect example of this. The very first that we launched as part of AWS was actually very technical. It was called message queuing. So the average software developer would look at message queuing and think, I don't quite know what this is all about. The average Amazon retail customer is like, why is a bookstore trying to sell me message queuing? This just makes no sense at all. But we knew that this was simply the first step in a very long journey. We weren't ready to really roll out the big picture vision or the roadmap for that journey. But the people that really understood what a message queue was for, that they could use it to build very large scale distributed systems, they looked at that and they said, message queuing. I know what to use that for, and I can put that to use. And even more interesting, it was like, something is definitely up at Amazon. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna keep my eye on them and see what's going on. We followed that up with storage and compute, and then the bigger picture of what we were all about with AWS and cloud computing came to be. Early on, as people said, what are you doing? Why are you doing message queuing and storage? We simply said, here are these services. We sure hope you find them useful. If not, that's okay. No worries at all. So we're okay with that misunderstanding from time to time. Another one of my favorite Japanese street foods. I actually made myself kind of hungry as I was putting this presentation together and missing all the sights and sounds and smells and tastes of street food in Japan. Can't wait to get back there again sometime soon. All right, let's talk about the next model of organizing for innovation. We call these mechanisms. So the thinking of a mechanism is that there's certain things that we do over and over and over again, kind of a mechanical process, if you will. How can we take that process and package it up and make sure that we do it in a somewhat repeatable, structured way to really take away the routine thoughts, the routine actions, and streamline what we do so that we can do more in the way of innovation and less in the way of routine. So you can think of a mechanism as some kind of a complete process. Now, in the simplest form, you can think of the mechanism as something that happens on an assembly line, but we also think of mechanisms as things that people and teams and software systems go through. We start with some set of inputs. We focus on tools. We focus on customer adoption. We think about ways that we can inspect this process along the way to make sure it's going as intended. It's going to probably iterate a whole bunch of times, and it's going to finally produce some outputs. So within Amazon, we are encouraged all the time to look for things that we're doing repeatedly, make sure that we identify them as a mechanism, document and describe them, and then share them widely as this is a way that we have discovered works well for us. So one of the most important mechanisms that we use within AWS, we call it the working backward process. So working backward means we need to solve a customer problem probably by launching an important new feature or a service. We work backward from customer requests, customer feedback, customer challenges, and usually in kind of a traditional organization, they're going to start by writing some kind of really difficult to read design document. We don't do that. Instead, what we do, we start by writing the press release. And the idea is that the press release might be the first thing a new customer sees when they're about to make a decision of, do I want to use this service? Our thinking is that the mechanism of having to take a very complex product and to simplify it enough to describe it in the page and a half of a press release, that is a very useful intellectual process. So how do you describe what something is? What is it named? What is the pricing model? What does it do? How does it do it? What do customers think of it? How do you get started? We always force ourselves to get all of that information identified and described in the space of a 1.5 page press release. This is a very difficult process, and the people that try to do this for the first time think, oh yeah, I'm going to write one of these in a day or an afternoon. The reality is these often go through 20, 30, 40 revisions before everybody agrees that this is what it is that we are going to build and to launch. As part of writing a press release, we also gather up a set of FAQs, frequently asked questions. And so whereas the press release is limited in size, it's invariably 1.5 pages, FAQs might be 10, sometimes 50 printed pages I've seen. The idea is we're going to try to we must get the press release perfect. we should identify as many questions as early as possible while we're still conceptualizing, while we're still figuring out what to build. We take the press release and the FAQ together. We put them into a single document. We call it the PR FAQ. And this becomes the single all-purpose document that if any team happens to see me in a hallway or on the street, back in the days when we actually could go to the office, if they could see me in those situations, and they say, Jeff, we've got this amazingly cool new thing. We want to tell you all about it. They would never schedule a meeting or send me a spec. They always say, we will send you the PR FAQ. So this becomes the standard communication tool that any of us within the organization we can very, very quickly read that press release. The first couple paragraphs give us a good sense of what's being built, scan through the rest to make sure we understand the details, and then we can do a little bit of a deep dive into the FAQ to make sure that we understand the more detailed questions. As we proceed through the process, we might do some storyboarding or some visuals as well. Another important aspect is our software architectures. The idea is that we try to, both internally and for customer use, build self-service platforms. So instead of some kind of an admission process and a team that needs to enable access and do setup work, we try to make it as much as possible that customers, both external and internal, can simply access the services and the resources they need on a self-service basis without any bureaucracy, without any forms, without any gatekeepers that are somewhere in the way. So great idea, get the resources, execute, without any bureaucracy anywhere in the middle there. So this is one of the ways that we make the culture very, very friendly to builders. They can get the resources that they need very, very quickly. Here I am on my first trip to Osaka, long time ago, probably 8 years ago at this point. And finally, how do we actually organize? How do we set up our teams? Let's talk about that. First is that we hire people that like to build things. And this could be, we often find that in addition to our employees, yes, they like to build things they like to build organizations, they like to build systems, they like to build things with software. But interestingly enough, you'll often find that they like to build things on their personal time as well. They're building their own robots, or they're doing electronics, or they're building their own house, doing 3D printing. There are people that just say, I've got some really interesting idea. I want to go from idea to reality, whether it is as my job or part of my personal life. And parts of our interview process, we try to find these people that just have this problem solving and this creative bent where they say, I want to create something. I want to make something. Kind of interesting side note of this. As part of what I do as evangelism is a lot about you want to do good work all the time, but it's often kind of a nurturing kind of a process where you need to do small things repeatedly over a long period of time. When I'm interviewing people that want to be evangelists or developer advocates, I'll often ask them if they like to grow things, garden. And they're like, that's kind of a weird question. And I actually have found that people that are very good at nurturing and cultivating and making sure that they pay close attention to something over a long period of time, they make wonderful developer advocates and evangelists. We try to keep our development teams small, and we have this model, we call it a two-pizza team. And the idea is we don't have some absolute number that says this is as big as a team can get, but by calling it a two-pizza team, that means for some number of people that are reasonably hungry and for some reasonable size of pizzas, those two pizzas should be about right to feed a team. There's no absolute number. You can imagine giant pizzas or very hungry people, but the thinking is if you call it a two-pizza team and you say this team has a single purpose in their existence, they can be fast, they can be agile, they can own whatever it is that they build, and they can make decisions very, very quickly without having to consult with a whole lot of other teams. Now, on the software side, one of the models we call own and build your run. And what that means is that traditional companies, there's often a group of developers, and then there's this really big wall, and then there's this other group of operations folks. The developers build their software systems, and to the developer's mind, they think that whatever they built is totally awesome. They build it, they almost literally throw it over the wall to the operations team who has to actually install it, run. Their view might not be quite the same as far as the level of awesomeness and perfection that the developers have. And in a traditional organization, you'll find there's actually some friction between the dev side and the ops side. Our model, build it, you run it. And so this means that the development team, they're responsible for keeping things running, for scaling, for reliability, for connecting with customers. And we find that over time that this ownership model really results in far better software systems. They're higher quality, they're more robust, they better reflect the needs of customers. We do encourage a lot of experimentation and testing. We do view everything that we do as some kind of experiment. We never think when we enter something new that it's just a guaranteed success of any sort. So every time that we venture into a new line of business, that's just an experiment or a test for us. We do that first step. If it works great, we're going to put more resources onto it. We're going to scale up. If not, we might step back a bit, figure out what we didn't know, learn that, and then try again a second time. A little quote from a shareholder letter, Jeff Bezos. He said, "Failure and invention are inseparable twins. To invent, you have to experiment. And if you know in advance it's going to work, it's not an experiment." So we always think in terms of experimentation. And one of the things that we hear a lot of times from our leaders is, what experiments are you running? Are you experimenting enough? So the idea is we always need to be trying out something new. The great thing is we've done lots of experiments, some of which have been incredible successes. AWS as a good example we talked about. We've done a lot more that were just utter failures. Amazon Auctions, Z-Shops, Marketplace, maybe you never heard of any of those. The Fire Phone, gigantic experiment. We made hundreds of thousands of phones, sold not that many of them. Each of these was an experiment of some sort, didn't work, took them off the market, figured out what we did wrong. In the case of Fire Phone, a lot of the software, the technology, the people, the teams, a lot of it ended up in various Alexa services. So sometimes these things kind of break into a million pieces, and you can take those pieces and put them back into something more useful. So there you have it. Culture, mechanisms, architecture, and organization. With that, quick quote from Jeff. "Invention comes in many forms and at many scales. The most radical and transformative of inventions are often those that empower others to unleash their creativity and to pursue their dreams." So you look at things like AWS, where you have this idea of all these different software components. We are then enabling others, we're empowering others to unleash their creativity. We're the developers, the entrepreneurs, the startups, take those services, put them together in some really interesting and unique way, and solve some amazing problem for their customers. And with that, let us step forward into the next phase of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll look forward now to your questions.
Hello, everybody. My name is Katie Collins. I am the event and program manager for the Japan America Society of the state of Washington, and I will be your Q&A master for today. So if you have any specific questions for Jeff, please go ahead and drop them in the Q&A section, and I will read them out and get him to answer them. But to start off, we would like to ask, can you please tell us more about your blogs and what is your motivation to write a blog article?
Sure. Okay. So I've always, probably at this point going on 20 years, I've had a personal blog of some sort. And I love the idea of a blog as a communication tool. When I was first working at AWS and I'm starting to see all the plans that we're putting together to launch all these different services. So I was lucky enough to work just a few doors down from Andy Jassy, who's now the CEO of AWS. I was just a couple of doors down from Andy in the early days. And Andy was writing his design documents, which we call narratives. Andy was writing these narrative documents for AWS. And Andy was talking about in his early documents, this is going back to 2004, 2005, these early documents were outlining all these different services that we're getting ready to build. And at this point, I'm the only evangelist that we have. My family was really young at the time, and I'm doing lots and lots of travel. And I'm kind of really thinking, well, with only one service, I'm very busy. How am I going to scale up to deal with this very, very large collection of services that I can see coming? So I sat down with Andy and I sat down with our PR team, and we conceptualized this idea of a blog to use as a launch vehicle for these services. The interesting thing is, back then, we're at this point, we're probably early 2004. At that point, there really wasn't an example of a corporate blog. Blogs were more personal. They were about self-expression. They were from people rather than from companies. So it was a little bit challenging for me to really convey what I was thinking of doing to the company. And so after a lot of discussion, I put the first couple posts online, and it turned out that simply having those first posts there was a great way to show the company what I was thinking as far as the style and the voice and the level of detail. And then as we started launching services, at first the blog was effectively an extra thing. Like I had plenty of other duties within marketing, and the blog was this extra thing, not quite a side project, but it wasn't as official as it is now. But over time, as the value started to become apparent, and we went from, I think, early launches, like when we launched S3, our first storage service, when we launched EC2, which is our Elastic Compute Cloud. We had a very simple process back in those days where the team would simply email me the PR FAQ a couple of days before, and we didn't really have a hugely sophisticated system or mechanism in place. So it was actually all managed out of my inbox in the early days. So when I go back to those first posts that I wrote for S3 and EC2 and the like, it was far less formal than we have now. Right now we have an entire team that is supporting me and the other bloggers behind the scenes. So we have a process of ticketing, where if any team would like us to write a blog post, they create a ticket. We review the tickets and we assign them to myself and the other bloggers. The service teams, as we call them, give us access to the service before the launch. We use the service. We write the initial blog post. We circulate it around the organization to make sure that all the stakeholders get a chance to review and to approve. And only when we have everything approved, and we wait eagerly for the launch day and then for the exact time when we're ready to launch, and then we go ahead and hit publish, and we share on social media. So it's over the years, and we're coming up, it'll be 16 years this coming November. It evolved from something very simple and informal to something that is now thought of as a central aspect of how we market our services. Awesome. One really important thing that we've discovered as we write the blog posts, it's very important to write with a personal voice and with personal experience. And this was something that we struggled with a bit in the early days. It wasn't clear if the post should come from me or from the team or from the service or from the organization or from the company. That wasn't quite clear. Now, after a little bit of experimentation, it was really clear that it should come from a person. So my name is on the first many hundreds of posts, and over the years, we've slowly built up a stronger blog team. But we have found that the personal voice and also personal experience. So the teams will always offer to say, well, we'll give you the service, but we'll take the screenshots for you to make your life a bit easier. But we say, you know what? We actually like to use everything ourselves. We want to gain that direct personal experience. So when we write, we can be very direct and honest and authentic about the post that we write. So that's a little bit of a behind the scenes look at how we like to think about and do our blogging.
Awesome, thank you so much. We have two audience questions that have come in. The first one is from Ambassador Michael Mahalik, and he asks, these models and principles are interesting. Do they travel well? Do you find that the same principles work around the world, or are there various adaptations that you need to make to transplant them to Asia, Europe, Alta, Amera, etc.?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I have traveled around the world a bit, and I do think that by and large, they do seem to apply regardless of the culture. The thing that I've learned as I do go to these different organizations is that we have put a level of effort into making sure that in our different offices outside of the US, that our employees do see the value of the leadership principles. Now, this starts at hiring time, where at the point when any new employee, potential employee, when they are seeking out information about how do I maximize my chances of success in the interview process, regardless of who they are, we always give them the same advice. Their advice is always to study the leadership principles, make sure that they can express themselves in those terms. We also, you'll find that when you are in any of the offices, they're very prominent locations, sometimes in the lobby of the building or in the break room, you'll find leadership principles, often both in English and in the local language or languages. You'll find them in very, very large stylized print in different locations as a strong reminder. Now, I don't often get close enough to our colleagues in other places to get a sense of like, well, do some of these not matter in a particular culture or location? I generally get the sense that they do apply more or less globally, with maybe a different emphasis on different ones. But the interesting thing when you look at these leadership principles, you will find that you can't always be awesome at all of them simultaneously. And one of the leadership principles is called "Are right a lot." And the way I look at that particular leadership principle is you have to have some level of experience and wisdom at deciding for any particular situation, which of these leadership principles am I going to decide are the most important ones, and which other ones might I say, okay, we are going to explicitly not do this particular one or two for this exercise that we're about to undertake.
Awesome. Okay, we have 2 more questions and about 4 more minutes, so we're going to try and do rapid fire here.
Right.
The next question comes from Mary Rayburn, and she asks, how formalized is innovation? Do staff have time they can take from their regular job to work on innovation? How are decisions made on which projects move forward?
Okay, let's see, Mary, that's a great question. And if I had a full hour, I could go into a little bit more detail on our process we call narratives, where the narrative documents are used to propose new business ventures. We don't have any particular amount of time that's set aside within our day as the innovation time. The expectation is more that it is simply something we have to work into our job, where whatever it is that you do, you have to somehow engineer thinking toward the future and thinking how to do things better as part of your job. Now, for me as a blogger, that often involves some kind of a new mechanism. Can I make the process of creating tickets a little bit smoother? Can I figure out a way to maybe make the review process not have so many iterations to it? Can I build some tools? Do I need a new database to track the list of reviewers, to track reviews that haven't come in? But the idea is that we don't on Friday morning say, okay, Friday is innovation day, and suddenly put on a different hat and dress in our innovation uniform. We're just going to be doing innovation as part of our daily job. And that's just going to be a very, very different for each different person and different team.
Thank you. Okay, so we have, our next question is from Toshi Kawachi, and he asks, if you compare the culture of innovation or innovation ecosystem in Japan and here, what is the difference? How can Japanese companies speed up the innovation?
So the thing that seems to work really well for us within Amazon is always the customer connection. And so I haven't been close enough to the organization of any Japanese companies to say this is how they do it, this is how we do it. But for us, what works really well is just to make sure that not only do we have the connection to our customers so that we can hear their feedback, but there's also this element I would call customer respect, where you say, when you do get feedback, and one aspect of that is when we get the feedback, we don't say, well, is this an important customer or someone that we're not so important? we simply just take all the customers as this is important feedback. If we get specific feature requests, we might have to wait a few of them if they're from like the larger customers. But the general idea of respecting feedback, requesting the ideas, regardless of where they come from, and always just saying, well, these customers are using, and maybe their career depends on what we do. We need to know who they are, listen to them, act upon what we hear. That to me is how we succeed. Now, when we say act upon what they say, that doesn't mean we have to do everything they say. Sometimes that's a little bit confused, and so sometimes you have to very carefully say, this is wonderful feedback. We love what you're telling us. We're going to go as far as we can within the product, but here's an extension or a starting point where you can then take that and build your own final solution to solve the bigger scale problem on your own.
Awesome. Okay, we have one more question, and we're going to keep it brief, and then I'm going to pass it off to Kay for the next section of our program. So our last question is anonymous, and they simply ask, why is the headquarters of Amazon located in Seattle?
Oh, so this goes way back to before my time, but my understanding is that at a certain point, Jeff Bezos and his then wife Mackenzie were living in New York, and they pretty much just set off across country and drove as far as they could. And somehow the legend has it that Jeff was writing the business plan while she was driving, and they kind of got all the way across the country, and they were in Seattle. This is all kind of second or third generation stories at this point. I do know that there's always been just a strong tech component to Seattle. We going back to companies like Boeing and early electronics companies like Fluke and Data IO and Tektronix. There's always been a pretty strong tech component to Seattle. So I don't know that Jeff did specific research, but certainly the tech is here and the workforce is here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your good questions. So I'm going to go ahead and move us into the next part of our program. I'm going to invite Kay Packard to join us. Kay is a member of our events committee at the Society, and she's also the senior manager in BDO's Valuations and Business Analytics Group based here in Seattle. And she is going to interview Jeff about his experiences in Japan. So welcome, Kay, and thank you again, Jeff, for your wonderful presentation.
Hi, thank you so much for the great presentation. It was very exciting and inspiring. So now I want to ask you some personal questions so that we get to know you a little better. So we heard that you're a huge fan of Japan and Japanese culture. So can you tell us how you got interested in Japan and Japanese culture?
Okay, so I never set out to actually become a fan. The interesting thing is I remember the first time I went, and it was so different. I was living on the east coast of the U.S. at the time in Maryland, and Maryland's kind of a quiet, kind of not super exciting kind of a place, and to land in the middle of Tokyo, probably 1990 or so, and bright lights and intensity and people going every which way and sights and sounds and smells. It's like, wow, this place is just really exciting, and lots of really interesting things are happening here. And I just love the overall intensity. I found that the people were just unfailingly kind and helpful and generous and polite, and it was like, this is like just such a interesting contrast. And I don't remember a lot of the details of my first trip there. I sure wish I had a better sense of history and thought, this is the start of something great. I should really capture more of this. But unfortunately, at first it was like, this is just a simple business trip for me.
Mm-hmm. So what is your favorite place or city to visit in Japan? And what do you like about that particular place? Is that food, culture, or something specific about the city? Well,
I've mostly spent time in various parts of Tokyo. I generally would fly into Tokyo and take the bus to Shibuya. And before I actually moved to the city of Seattle, I lived out in the suburbs, and I wasn't much of a city person. And walking through Shibuya, I'd say for for quite some time, I probably knew a lot of those streets and shops and alleyways better than I knew Seattle at some point. I love the fact that you can wander around and that you can be immersed, and there's this interesting kind of a bubble effect that I don't know if this is peculiar to being an outsider, but there's this, you can be immersed in all of this, but somehow still have this little bit of protection around you in some interesting way where you're just kind of there. Now a funny thing that happens to me is whenever I'm walking down the street, people always stop and ask me for directions. And I thought that was a United States thing, but I've had it happen multiple times to me in Tokyo as well, where someone would just stop me and say, "Excuse me, sir, do you know where the such and such is?" And both times I actually did. So it's just this uniquely interesting thing that I somehow don't know where things are, and I maybe walk like I know what's going on. So I don't know.
Interesting. And also, we saw several pictures of Japanese food during your presentation. So what is your favorite Japanese food and what is your least favorite?
Oh, let's see. Well, I don't know that I've had every possible cuisine. I actually, let's see, I like everything, honestly. I've never had something where I regretted it afterward. I have more than once had whenever my hosts ask me, they say, "What would you like to try?" I say, "Surprise me." I'm very flexible. And I always say, as long as it's not still moving, I'm very, very happy to give it a try. But I've had some amazing tempura, certainly really interesting. I've been to the fish market and had ultra fresh sashimi and sushi there. I think rather than a favorite, I love the fact that there's an art to all the food, and that it's not simply let's just kind of pile everything on the plate. Let's make sure that the plate itself is a work of art, and let's make sure that everything has this concern and this care and this detail level that says someone has really put some thoughtfulness and some love effectively into making this plate something that you're going to really kind of respect and admire. So even before Instagram was a thing and people had to take a picture of every meal, it was clear that Japanese food had this visual appeal to it. Now, have I ever had something that I didn't like? Can't actually say that I have. I've had the fugu, which I thought was really interesting. I once had some sashimi where they said, "Eat this first and we'll tell you what it is afterward." And it turned out, I think it was horse. And so
Wow.
You have to be an adventurer. And I think part of when you're traveling, you should be open to a new culture, and you shouldn't say, "Oh, I don't want to try that." And I think a lot of Americans kind of have reputations of not being too willing to try something different, and I'd much rather just give it a try and just see what it might be like. You can always find something new to enjoy.
That's interesting. It kind of relates to what you do for business and appreciate the innovations and creation.
Yeah.
So are you a good cook? Do you ever cook Japanese food at home?
I've never done that. I do have 3 daughters who love to cook, and we're always trying something different. But I guess there's always a really interesting trade-off of, are you the expert or not? And there's so many wonderful places to eat great Japanese food in the Seattle area. I really actually want to let all those wonderful chefs have their opportunity to shine. You know, we've got wonderful fresh fish, and we've got wonderful chefs of all sorts, and we like them to do their best.
Okay, so instead of just to visit, if you have a chance to live in Japan for a long period of time, where would you like to live?
Interesting. I would probably want to live in a big city. I actually find that I know that there's a lot of really nice countrysides. I haven't gotten to see a whole lot of them, but I would find any big city really, really fun. And I think it would be really challenging to be kind of a permanent outsider. I think would be a really interesting aspect of what would it be like to always be the outsider or the minority. I don't think it would be bad. I think it would be a really interesting mental challenge sometimes to kind of always stick out in the crowd. But I think that's a good thing to me. Like, you know, we talk a lot lately about things like unconscious bias and about equality and opportunity. And I think it's a wonderful thing to have the tables turned on you sometimes and say, okay, this is what life is like for everybody else. And I never mind that at all. To me, that's a feature of being in a different culture, is to suddenly say, oh, this is what it's like to be such and such in the US, and suddenly to be treated just a little bit differently and say, this is a great perspective. This is a really good mirror that I might not have had this opportunity to have otherwise.
That's very interesting. So either with working internally with people at Amazon, or based on your personal experience externally, do you feel any difference in working with Japanese companies or Japanese people?
The thing that I've traditionally had to be really careful of is, and I know that it's really difficult for things to transfer properly across cultures, but within Amazon, your manager will often, you start a new job, a new position, your manager will give you a lot of things to do. So try this, try that. And the part that isn't always stated is at a certain point you say, you've given me too much, and I either need to say no to some things, or I need to start building up a team to deal with it. I think in the early days, we weren't good at explaining that model to our new hires in Japan. And there was sometimes people would try to work too hard and not realize that they had the option to say no. And it took us all a little while, I think, to fully grasp how that works in Japanese society, to say it's totally reasonable to say, I have too much work to do and I can't do it all. And the idea that you need to just work yourself to exhaustion to do all the things, because every manager is simply going to toss out a lot of interesting ideas. And there's a little bit of subtlety sometimes of what's an idea versus what is a thing I really need you to do. And I think that we've gotten a little bit better at understanding the aspect of Japanese culture where when, you know, after something might have gone through a translation or it's somebody's second language, making sure that we don't overload people, because it was good ideas versus put this on your to-do list and make sure it happens.
That's very interesting. Okay, so this is my last question. Do you have anything on your bucket list that is related to Japan?
My bucket list. You know, the thing is, I look back to that 1990. I sure wish I had just decided to like learn one kanji character a day. If I had learned one per day for the last 30 years, I would actually have some level of ability to know what's going on. And instead I can I think maybe I can recognize 2 or 3 if I'm on the subway long enough. I can figure out my context, but maybe 2 or 3 of them actually mean. Now, I might actually be really bad at learning languages because my wife speaks Spanish as her first language, and I've known her for close to 40 years, and my Spanish is also really bad. But still, if I'd gone back and just put a tiny bit of effort for the last 30 years into learning some level of Japanese, that was a bucket list thing I should have taken back when I was much, much younger.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and a great presentation today. So I am going to pass on to one of our event committee members at Japan America Society, Sarah Ellisbrook.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm going to quickly announce the exciting upcoming events, but before doing that, I wanted to take a moment to thank Jeff-san for your amazing, insightful presentation this afternoon. And if anybody were to learn about Amazon culture, and as an Amazonian, I can attest, Jeff is the best person. So we're all very, very lucky today to have been able to have this opportunity. So thank you so much, Jeff. And also your genuine friendship you cultivated with the people of Japan over the years, and promoting cloud computing through the technology exchanges, that your contribution is just immeasurable beyond words. So thank you again. And as an Amazonian, I feel compelled to remind all of you that Ms. Kaylee Collins from Japan Society will be sending your survey link at the end of this event. And we take customer feedback very seriously, like Jeff said. So please take a moment and provide your feedback. You can even say, please, Jeff, come back again for Japan Society events. So thank you again, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, and Dale will be showing us the list of event lineup. Thank you, Dale. So first, just like Jeff, Japan Society has been committed to promoting the exchanges between the US and Washington State and Japan over the last 97 years. It's almost 100 years old. And so we have a list of exciting events coming up, starting off this coming Saturday, August 29th, is a virtual beer garden featuring some of our active Japan Society members, including the past chair Karin Zag Black of Port of Seattle, Mr. Kawachi of Mitsubishi Corporation, and also from the country of Fiji, the Ambassador Omura, who was the past 2 generations ago, the Consul General of Seattle. He will also be joining this beer garden. So come join us for networking, meet old people, but also make new friends this coming Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. And thank you, Chris Cummings, for organizing this great event. And the next up is thank you, the 60th annual golf tournament to take place in Newcastle. This is an in-person event, but each of you would have your own tea time, followed by a happy hour at the end. And these are the list of current sponsors. We will always welcome you to consider sponsoring this great event. And the event sponsors, thank you very much, including my former boss, Ambassador Mahalak, among others. And we look forward to seeing you on this golf tournament. And in the chat box, Katie should be have already put the registration and detailed info if you're interested. And then the third one is this is also a very interesting event. It's a startup pitches for new businesses in the Pacific Northwest. A group of 3 startup AI-related startup companies will do pitches, business pitches in front of angel investors, sponsored by Swan Venture Group. This whole event was started out by my dear friend Tetsu Eto several years ago, and often held at the Consul General's residence as an official event. And so you have an opportunity to see what it's like as an entrepreneur to pitch your great new business ideas in front of your potential investors. So those of you who are interested in starting out new business and in need of garnering funds, this is a must check out event. It's going to be on September 30th at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And last but not least, we wanted to get your attention, save the date. December 1st will be our virtual holiday dinner. It'll be taking place virtually this year, given the circumstances, and online auction and programs, and more detail to follow, but we wanted to give you this date as your placeholder. And if you're interested in donating gifts or to become sponsors, please contact the Japan Society. And moving on, in support of local talented artists and musicians in these very difficult times, we wanted to highlight this amazing violinist, Takumi Taguchi. and accompanied by Nozomi Khudyev for piano this afternoon. And Takumi has received numerous awards both in Seattle and nationwide, and he's currently enrolled at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. And I wanted to introduce Takumi and also the piece he will be playing at the end of this program.
Hello, I'm Takumi. Thank you. Arigatou gozaimasu. Hi, I'm Takumi Taguchi, and I'd like to thank you all so much for being here. Right now, I also wanted to thank the Japan America Society for having me and for giving me this opportunity to share my music with all of you, especially during this time when there isn't so much chance to do so. Today, you'll hear a performance recorded yesterday of the beautiful meditation by Jules Massenet from his opera Thais. And I hope that you'll enjoy it as it closes out this great event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Takumi, for your wonderful performance. I was so drawn in. I forgot the moment to thank you very much. That was really, really, especially relaxing in this turmoil, and very nice to end this exciting afternoon. And thank you very much for all of you for taking your time to participate in this exciting event, and look forward to seeing you again. And remember to fill out the survey that's in your chat box, and followed by email. So look forward to seeing you hopefully in the near future. Thank you again.